This is the law of detachment, an ancient principle that says the less you are attached to outcomes, the more power you have. And I'm going to teach you how to master it in real life so that you can do things like walk into any room and command presence without trying, pursue your goals with zero anxiety about failure, and make decisions that others agonize over in seconds. By the way, my name is Gonzalo, and I use the law of indifference in my life to get over 400K Twitter impressions, which is 1,000% higher than any month I've ever done on my whole life doing Twitter. I was able to resurrect my channel from getting literally 0 views for weeks and months. What looks like 1,000, 1,200 in a couple of days. I was able to gain 20 pounds. I was able to start finally building my dream business, do cool shit, make new friends, live a cool life, and get married to my wife. Dude, I promise you this, if you watch the rest of this video, which will be quick, it will change your life in the very same way. Let me be honest with you, most men are slaves to their own reactions. So if something goes wrong, they're going to panic. If someone laughs at them, they're going to get defensive, right? They're going to try to fight back. They're going to try to throw insults back, hurl insults back, and get petty. If they are unsure of something, they're going to get anxious. They're going to start overthinking. They're going to start attaching themselves to different fears and emotions they have. Most men are slaves to their own reactions that cannot be ignored. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. The issue, the reason why men are like this is not because of the circumstances of their life, or because that's just how we humans function. It's because your nervous system, because of your lived experiences and your mindset that you lived those experiences through, is programmed to attach to things and to attach great significance to outcomes, to emotions, to all these changing variables in your life that are the actual reason you can't move forward. And when nobody's telling you, is that this is actually harming your ability to go out there and operate at a peak, maxed out level of life. Like, think about the dream life you want to live. That's the life that you cannot get. That very life that you imagine and literally think of every single second. You can't get that life because you are attached to outcomes, because you haven't mastered the law of indifference, right? You fear every action and what it can do. You fear failure, you fear risk, you fear embarrassment. You're constantly anxious. You're constantly changing your mind. You're constantly in different emotional states. You're constantly having different mindset, different environments, different social circumstances. I remember the first time I genuinely understood this, and that was breaking up with my ex, which was a pretty long relationship, 3 years. That decision, that time of my life, was the first time I truly understood this law. So let's give you a little quick story time. So I had been obsessing over this decision, whether I should break up with her or not, for weeks. And if I'm honest, and with no offense to her, that's why I have censored her. By the way, this picture is not her, just a random photo I found. I had been obsessing over this decision for a couple of weeks, but really for their entire relationship, because it was something that I always felt was the right thing to do. But specifically at this time, a couple of weeks before we broke up, I was actually obsessing over this decision. She was just acting hectic. She was unbearable. She was genuinely, if I'm being very raw with you, was genuinely like acting demon possessed. And I just couldn't bear being with this woman any longer. But I was running every calculation, every risk. I was scared of throwing away 3 years of my life away and all, but the stories and, the how we met and all that. You're thinking about all these different, I was thinking about all these different variables, right? And I continued to delay my decision until she pretty much forced my hand. And I remember that very day where she thought she finally got me. She was like, I'm going to break up with him and I'm going to, do all this bullshit that she was trying to do. In that very moment, thank to God, I remember just realizing that even if I do waste these 3 years, even if the wrong thing happens, let's say I break up with her, and that maybe wasn't the right decision, I'm not gonna die. It doesn't define me. It doesn't say anything about me. This outcome isn't me. This woman isn't me. This relationship isn't me. This history, the story, these emotions, they're not me. And so I remember she forced my hand and she was like, haha, got you. We're breaking up. And no, I'm not fighting about this. And I was just like, okay, then we're breaking up. Blocked her, never talked to her again. And well, I'm married now. And with no offense to her, who fucking knows where she is? But I promise you, she isn't married. She isn't living the life she wants to live. I am. Scenario, that part of my life taught me so much about just how much power the law of indifference, the law of detachment has within you. So how do you actually rewire this? How do you strip away reactive thinking and install detachment as your default operating system? How do you build the law of detachment into your life so that you can also have those sort of life-altering situations like I just told you about? Look, There are two truths you have to understand to actually stop overthinking and master the law of indifference. And once you understand these two truths that I'm going to cover, I'll reveal 3 finger-licking, balls to the floor, powerful methods to stop overthinking. Those being 1, layered thinking, 2, expansion slash future casting, and number 3, the law of it. But first, let's cover truth number 1. You aren't what you think you are. It sounds crazy. Maybe you look like that dog right now, but it is true. So let me propose a very weird scenario. I want you to imagine you are outside and you are observing trees. Now, if you were observing a tree, you would notice that it's green, it has leaves, it has big chunk of wood, paws, it has roots, and so you observed things about the tree. But because you can observe the tree, it would be fair to say that you aren't the tree. Let me drive this in. Let's say you, propose another weird scenario, are observing your girlfriend. You might notice that she's cute. You might notice that she's hot if she's a degenerate. If you are a degenerate, just kidding. You're allowed to be attracted to your partner. You might notice she has brown hair. You might notice she has glasses, that she's short, that she's nice, etc., etc. But because you can observe your girlfriend, it's pretty obvious and simple to say that you aren't your girlfriend, right? And so what you can observe, you are not. You wouldn't be crazy enough to say you are your girlfriend or you are the tree you were seeing, right? Of course you wouldn't. But here's the problem. You observe everything you think you are. You observe your thoughts. You observe your mind. You observe your actions. You observe your body, your arm, your movements. You observe your emotions. You observe all these things. And yet, for some weird reason, you identify with them as if you are them. The truth of the matter is that detachment, it starts with what identity or what thing you attach to. And if it's any of those fleeting things, you're never going to actually be able to build the law of indifference into your life. So let's focus, me and you, to for me to actually be able to drill this in. Because here's how I break it down. Here's how, what helped me understand it. You are attached to what you identify with internally. And so what that means is that if you identify with your emotions, you're going to be attached to your emotions. And so if you feel sad, you're going to run with that. If you feel mad, you're going to run with that. If you feel like not working, you're going to run with that. If you feel like watching porn for the 3rd time today, you're going to run with that. If you feel like skipping the gym, you're going to run with that. You get the point. If you're attached to your thoughts, even worse, you're going to run with whatever thought you have. By the way, this is genuinely what ADHD is. No one can tell me anything else. ADHD is not some mental disease you have. It's the fact that you identify with your thoughts. And so, like, a monkey, you see a squirrel, and you're focusing on the squirrel. You feel like you wanted to get water, so you're getting water. You feel like standing up, so you're standing up. You identify with your thoughts, and so you move with your thoughts. And so what you identify with internally is what you attach to. And what you attach to externally, so outside of your inner being, is just things that reflect or reinforce your internal attachments. And so if you're attached to the emotion of comfort, then you're going to do things that externally reflect or reinforce that. So you're going to dress comfortably. You're going to have all these addictions that keep you comfortable. And now you're seeing the issue, right? Now you're seeing what I mean by detachment starts with what you identify with internally. This is why you should identify with this, the observant being, and not this, because this is an eternal thing, right? You are the eternal observant consciousness, observing the temporal mental states and thoughts and actions and bodily, sensations and emotions, right? The second truth you need to understand before we get into the actual methods of how you do this is that all attachment is based on fear. All of it, right? Fear in this circumstance would be the emotional perception of a threat. And so when we perceive threats, the reason this is so important is that we attach / cope to things to defend against those threats. So you might smoke weed to stay calm. You might eat junk food because you're trying to cope with stress. You might watch porn because you're trying to cope with loneliness and the crippling realization that you might not have the cycle kind of works like this, right? Fear and anxiety create attachment. Attachment creates passivity. Passivity creates fear and anxiety. And so the cycle repeats and gets worse and worse. This is why you started with TikTok and ended with TikTok, YouTube shorts, porn, masturbation, junk eating, weed, smoking, or drugs, hookup, lusting, idle talk, drinking, and every other addiction under the sun. Because you repeated the cycle so much that you made more and more attachment with. And so when you do these two things, it allows you to observe your fears, observe the cycle replaying without acting in on it, without actually falling into it and actually running the cycle again. These two truths become far more powerful with the three methods that we're going to talk about now. The first one is layered thinking. So to master layered thinking, you first have to master the third perspective thinking and problematic layers. By the way, layered thinking specifically, to me, is the most powerful one out of the three, and it led to all of this. It led to me finally blowing up my Twitter, reviving my channel. It's what actually got me over the mental barriers of gaining weight and allowed me to gain 20 pounds within the last couple months and 50 pounds within my whole journey. It's what allowed me to actually get over all the social, manipulations and all the things people were telling me to not get married, and it actually convinced me to get married at 19. It's what allowed me to live a life that I think is fulfilling in the identity and the person that I actually want to be. That's all layered thinking did to me. So if you can listen for the next couple minutes and implement, even especially if you implement the rest of the two other methods we're going to talk about, I promise you can change your life. So first, let's master third perspective. If you've played video games, you know about first versus third person, right? This is first person. You're like actually seeing it from the eyes of the person. And third person, it's like there's a camera behind you and you're kind of following the character. And so when it comes to the law of detachment, first and third person is more about how you identify with things. And so, for example, I kind of mix these up. So it's supposed to be flipped or whatever. First person would be I am X. And third person would be, again, the images are switched up. John feels X. John being you, of course. The thing about first person when it comes to trying to detach, try to master the law of indifference, is that it's harder to see. Yeah, you're not aware of your surroundings as much. You have a limited tunnel vision perspective. You have no spatial cues. And so when you're panicking, for example, and you're thinking from first person, it's harder to see that there's no reason to be panicking. It's harder to be aware of what's actually happening. You have a limited understanding of it because all you can think about is the current panic. But when you're in third person, when it comes to the law of detachment, I'm not speaking about video games. I don't give a fuck. You have a full view. You're detached from immediate feedbacks. You have environmental and spatial cues. You have a wider perspective. You have more data. You have more angles. You pretty much have a better view on things. And so, for example, if you were panicking again, you'd have a fuller view if you were thinking in third person because you're not the one experiencing it, if you get what I'm saying. You would be detached from the immediate feedback of your heart racing, of you sweating, of you feeling the anxiety. You would have other cues. You would have a wider perspective, maybe multiple perspectives. You'd have more data. You'd have more angles to look at it from, which would all help you, I think you would agree, cope with or handle your anxiety and any other issue in your life. And so, how do you think third person? The way I like to think in third person, by the way, this is not something you have to do your whole life. You don't want to totally disassociate. But I like to sometimes, when it is beneficial to, invoke the interviewer method to master the law of indifference. And so, the way the interviewer method works is that you're going to imagine yourself, the eternal being, interviewing the one experiencing things. So I do this all the time. And so, for example, let's say I'm at work. And so my job, it gets very boring. Literally half an hour, hours at a time, I can be doing nothing but sitting down and staring at a wall, which is boring. And so the threat of boredom will come to me. And I will want to cope with my phone because I had 10,000 hours on video games, 12-hour screen time for most of my life. It's a learned habit. And so when I really feel that strong urge, what I will do is I'll disassociate. I'll go into third person and I'll start interviewing myself. What do you feel? Like, okay, well, I feel like using my phone. I feel angsty. I feel bored. I want to do something, want to move. Okay, so what can we do instead? Well, we can, read a book. We're only 20 pages away. I'm literally talking about what happened today. I was like, okay, we have 16 pages left on this book. Let's finish the book. Or you know what? Let's just pace around back and forth. You know what? Let's start observing every one thing about every, and by interviewing myself, I was able to work around the feeling of wanting to use my phone. I realized it's not that bad, and it's not the only solution. There's a lot of better things that I can do. And so the interviewer method is a fantastic way to be able to get out of your own head. And when you need to, especially when you're going to do what we're going to do next, which is learn how to solve problems and look at life in layers, which you cannot do if you're thinking from first person. The interviewer method is a fascinating way to do this. So now let's get into problematic layers. The way I'm going to teach you this is by telling you a story. So when I got married, a couple weeks before I got married, which marriage was already planned, we already knew we were going to get married, we already knew we were going to live everything. A couple weeks before that, I actually got fired from my job. My job made a fair amount of money for where I was in life. I was making around 3 grand, which is more than I've ever made in my life from any job, even when I was working 12 hours a day, 2 jobs at 16. More than I was making even then. And I remember I was panicking. And for weeks, I was applying to jobs, trying to get that same type of job in my life. And I was not getting any jobs. And a couple days after I got married, I felt like a quintessential failure. I'm the man, I need to provide. Eventually, I want to make sure my wife never has to work, but I don't have a job. And she has a job, but I don't have a job, and I'm supposed to leave. How am I going to get taken seriously if I don't have a job, right? I started panicking myself into a corner. And so one day I remember sitting down being like, why the fuck don't I have a job? Because every time I have a problem, eventually I always just get to that. Like, just the bare bones, why the fuck do I not have a job? And that's when I realized that the reason I didn't have a job was because I was trying to find a job like the job I just had, instead of just trying to find a job. And that's your problem. You're so attached to the first person perspective that you can't break free and see the truth. And that's why, to me, layered thinking is so powerful, because it's one of the easiest ways to detach from current reality. And that's to realize and to kind of imagine, on what step does current reality fall? Because it really, one thing might be that the reason you're struggling in life is because you're attached to the future, to future problems, right? I think I put it well here, right? What I learned from this story is that if you are overthinking and attached to a problem, an outcome, or a level of your life, like if you're attached to a current reality of your being, it's because you are probably trying to solve problem 2. You're attached to the future without even identifying problem 1. Maybe if you stopped trying to focus on being as attractive as humanly possible and trying to signal to this girl that you have long-term dating potential so that you can get married with her, maybe, dumbass, you should sit at the desk next to her in class, so the likelihood of you guys talking goes up. Maybe you should approach her instead of being an idiot and trying to imagine what it would be like and attaching yourself to the outcome of being married, when that's not present reality, is it? Number 2 is future casting / expansion. So let me tell you about John real quick. John has a white car. And John is a very sensitive young man. He wants to be like every other young man in town. He wants to be liked. He wants to be relatable. He wants to be sociable. Maybe you feel like this, right? Not to say whether this is good or bad. We're just talking about John's story, okay? Don't be a judgmental prick. The only issue is John has a white car, and every man in his town of 100 people, every man has a yellow car. And so John feels insecure. He feels like he stands out too much. He feels weird. He feels like he was stupid for ever getting a white car. I mean, who gets a white car? Clearly, everyone gets yellow cars. Everyone likes yellow cars. I mean, it's clear that if the 50 people in his town all have yellow cars, that yellow cars must be the most popular car. And yeah, let's stop for a second, brother, and get outside of the story. We all know that yellow cars are not that popular, because even though every person in his town has a yellow car, he bought a white car. And if he would expand his perspective, if he would expand his view and realize that if you look at the whole world, the average person owns a white car, John would realize that he does have the car that every other man has. So that's expansion. Now, to tell you about future casting, let me tell you about Steve. Now, Steve is a sensitive young man. And don't judge him and be a little prick like I told you before. But he has to go up to a presentation. And like a coward, he's very afraid to do this presentation. And so he goes and does the presentation. He gets nervous. He starts slipping up. Let me put it to me so you can really understand Steve, really get to connect with him. He slips up. He's panicking. He's sweating. And halfway through the presentation, he realizes his crush is in attendance, and oh, Mary's in attendance. I can't slip up around Mary, and so he's getting more and more anxious, and does something totally embarrassing. He slips, he falls, he starts stuttering, whatever the hell you can think of. The most embarrassing thing Steve can do, he does it. And he starts thinking, it's fucking over, Mary hates me, I look like a stupid dumbass, I should probably go in KY. He starts thinking crazy shit. But here's what Steve should have done. Can you imagine if Steve were to sit there and he does the embarrassing thing? He would have gone, okay, this sucked, but, everyone's laughing at me. But if I thought about it in a week, what would happen? Well, the worst thing that could happen, and this is genuinely the worst thing that could happen, is that everyone forgets. Because do you remember the most embarrassing thing you saw your friend do 2 weeks ago? No. I promise you, no one remembers the most embarrassing thing you were. But here's the power. If he can detach from this by realizing that in 2 years, in 2 weeks, in the future, no one's going to care, he can take that power into the present. Because imagine if Steve was like, well, if no one's going to care, if the worst thing that can happen is that no one would care and everyone would forget, then why don't I handle this with confidence? Why don't I turn this into a funny moment? Why don't I laugh at myself? Why don't I make a joke of myself? Why don't I make this a social moment? And so suddenly, people do remember that Steve did this, but they remember it because it left them inspired. And so by detaching from the outcome, from the situation, by future casting, he could take the power of the future cast that he casted into the present and get the best possible outcome. And now you're seeing how these methods are so powerful, right? What did we learn from these two stories? We learned that if you expand or if you cast into the future, 99% of attachments become so irrational, you just let go of them. And so let's cover the last thing real quickly, the law of exposure. It pretty much states that if you want to detach from something, you have to expose yourself to it over and over again until you can actually become numb to it. This is not theory. This is how people that, the doctors that cure allergies, this is how they do it. If you're allergic to peanuts, they'll expose you to like microscopic amounts of peanuts constantly till your body gets used to having peanuts in the systems. This is how phobias are cured. If you're afraid of spiders, they show you, spiders every single day from an increasing amount. Maybe just a tiny little jumping spider, and then suddenly you're, seeing tarantulas. Suddenly you're feeling tarantulas, letting them crawl on you, right? This is how you heal phobias. The law of exposure is how you heal allergies. Is how you get to accept and heal trauma. It's a true and tested fact, not a theory. And so basically all you do if you want to use the law of exposure to master the law of indifference is that you need to identify the thing that you are not indifferent to, so that you are attached to. You need to find controlled ways to expose yourself to it. You need to come into those controlled ways to expose yourself to it with the mindset that you are going to be indifferent and try to control it. And you just need to do this over and over again until it becomes automatic. So let's say you cry a lot. You're a man that cries a lot and you're trying to learn how to not cry because you don't want to be a bitch. Find that movie scene that always makes you cry. Before you watch the movie scene, come into it with the mindset that you are not going to shed a tear. You're not even going to let your body get to the point where it wants to cry. If you cry, or if you get close to it, do this again with maybe a different scene so you're not just becoming numb to the scene itself, with different things that make you sad, till you become indifferent to the feeling of sadness, and the feeling of sadness loses all control of you because you have trained yourself to do so by exposing yourself. If you can do this, I promise you, brother, that your overthinking, your attachment will be gone. I promise you that, like Tucker Carlson in this image, you will build a fuck you mindset.